Theater and Film Studies Department. I'm the director and writer of this evening's performance presentation. And so to kind of give you an understanding of where this project is coming from. About a year ago, I was contacted by Sujata Iyengar and Barbara McCaskill from the English department here at UGA, who said, "Hey, George, would you like to do a reading of a play as part of this Phyllis Wheatley conference that's going on?" And I was like, "Sure, what do you have?" And they sent me this script from a pageant that was presented for one performance only in 1932. And it was about Phyllis Wheatley, and it was written by Mary Church Terrell. At that time, I was not familiar with Mary Church Terrell's work. I have since then come to so strongly admire this amazing woman and the work that she did for the Black community in early 20th century America. And so I happened to be going to the Library of Congress at the same time, and I said, "Hey, you know, let me think about this, and I'll go to the LOC, and I'll see what they have there." And as fortune has it, Mary Church Terrell donated all of her papers and her letters to the Library of Congress. And they are all online. You can go right now and look at those papers. And so I said to them, "You know, I read this pageant. It's about 5.5 hours long, and I don't think it would be something we can produce at UGA." I said, "But having looked at the letters and Terrell's documents, I think that we can take some of that and kind of merge it together into some sort of a presentation performance." And so what you're going to be seeing this evening is 98.333% Terrell's words, taken directly from her letters and her documents. And what was really interesting is that I found a series of letters specifically addressing the production and her creation of this pageant. The pageant was presented, like I said, one night only, and it was performed by high school and elementary school students in the Black high schools in DC. And they all came together, they would all rehearse separate parts, and they all came together for this one night to just do this performance. And then it was never done again. We have one picture from that performance. There's very little documentation left. So this whole year has been really fascinating for me to kind of dig into the archives. You're going to be hearing music from the original production. I was able to track down some of the original scores that have been unpublished. You're going to be seeing dance that's reconstructed from the ideas of the original choreographer. And of course, you're going to be hearing the words of Mary Church Terrell, as well as the people associated with production. So with that in mind, that's kind of what you're going to be seeing. The show lasts about an hour. Afterwards, we are going to be doing a talkback with the cast and Barbara and Sarah from Texas Christian University. And we would love you to stick around. If you are unable to stick around, we have a survey. There are QR codes as you exit. That's a survey that we ask you to please fill out. We'd love to hear your responses to the show. But we will be also, as I said, talking about it afterwards, probably for about 20 minutes. It shouldn't be that long. Other than that, I of course have to thank the Wilson Center for the Arts and Humanities for their support for this project. And I, of course, have to thank Texas Christian University and Sarah Ruffins Robin. And of course, because I never remember the exact name, hold on. This is all part of a conference that's been going on for a year called The Genius of Phyllis Wheatley Peters, A Poet and Her Legacies. So with that, you can hit the lights there. I'm going to hit this light over here. And enjoy the show. Thank you.
Beta Sigma chapter of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority here at Virginia College. When our committee was asked to choose an inspiring woman to be our keynote speaker, Mary Church Terrell's name rose to the top of our list. Her life has been dedicated to the uplifting of her race as a leading political activist, a journalist, and most recently as a playwright, writing and mounting a pageant about America's first published African poetess, Phyllis Wheatley. We have asked her here this evening to speak about what inspired her to write the pageant and the mission that she hopes that it fulfills. Ladies, Mrs. Mary Church Terrell.
Good evening, ladies.
Good evening.
I read many pageants written to celebrate George Washington's 200th birthday. Without exception, the colored people mentioned in them were objects of ridicule. They were all slaves, of course. Their imperfect English and their mirth-provoking antics were used to make the audience laugh. It occurred to me that it was somebody's duty to write a pageant about a creditable representative of our group who lived in George Washington's time, of whose career our young people would have reason to be proud, where colored people would not participate and have their self-respect suffer. I made this statement at one of the committee meetings of the National Association of Colored Women, whereupon one of my friends said banteringly, "Why don't you write one yourself?" Everybody enjoyed the sally, including myself, but no one took the remark seriously. At the next meeting, I said again, it would be a pity and a bad reflection upon us if we should let the bicentennial year pass without producing a pageant depicting the achievement of somebody with African blood in his veins. Again, my friend challenged me by saying, "Why don't you write one yourself? I believe you can do it." Well, in sort of daredevil spirit, I replied, "Yes, I can, and I will." As soon as I got home, I started to write the pageant, which was produced in Washington last November under the auspices of the District of Columbia George Washington Bicentennial Commission, which donated more than $1,000 to defray the expenses incident to staging it. It was a true community event. We worked with the DC Public Schools and involved over 150 young colored men and women in telling this story. The presentation involved music, dance, songs, and tableau. I aim to do several things in writing this pageant. I took my inspiration from my earlier stage experience with pageants. I appeared in W.E.B. Du Bois's African pageant, The Star of Ethiopia, in which I portrayed Harriet Beecher Stowe. Du Bois sought to create a drama that was for us, by us, about us. Wanted to display the rich, fertile mind and accomplishments of our race. From the histories which they study and the books which they read, our children learn much about the marvelous deeds of prowess which their Caucasian ancestors have achieved. But they know comparatively little about the creditable things which their African forebears have done. I felt that if they saw the life story of this remarkable African girl pictured before their very eyes, it would make a deep impression upon them, would increase their pride in their racial group, and thus strengthen their self-respect. And I also wanted to present George Washington to our youth in such a light that they would feel they had good and sufficient reasons for revering him as the father of our common country. I wanted to show our children that even though George Washington was a slaveholder in accordance with the deplorable custom of the time, nevertheless, he was broad-minded, generous-hearted enough to make acknowledgement of the talent of an African girl and to pay homage to her while she was still being held as a slave. We must teach our children that we are citizens of this country, and as such, whenever the opportunity is afforded, we must take part in every national movement in which other groups join. It is our country, too. Whenever we celebrate Washington's birthday, we are sure to refer to him as first in peace. It is quite probable that very few who eulogize the father of his country know that a little black girl, a full-blooded African, but a few years removed from the land of her birth, was the first person to confer this title upon him. It was Phyllis Wheatley who wrote a poem in his honor, and in one of the lines addressed him as first in peace and honors. This is the story I chose to tell to our young people. We decided to collaborate with local schools to cast the production with students playing the many parts. Different schools were responsible for preparing and rehearsing different scenes. Then we all would come together for the one-time performance.
To all faculty and staff, from the Committee of Coordinating Activities Among Colored People for the George Washington Bicentennial Celebration of the District of Columbia, Garnet C. Wilkinson. To all faculty and staff, the Committee on Coordinating Activities has chosen Mary Trish to be presenting a pageant based on the interesting life story of Phyllis Wheatley, a little African girl who became recognized as one of the foremost American woman poets. This office approves of this pageant and will be very happy to have them present in the Washington Auditorium. My office approves of this pageant and believes that the successful presentation of this pageant can be guaranteed by the interested participation of our public school children. Mrs. Terrell will probably approach her office with a request that the school participate in the pageant. My office approves of this pageant and will be very happy to have the schools of Districts 10 through 13 participate in this presentation.
And I have the support of Mrs. Marie Moore Forrest, the director of the National Committee on Pageantry and Community Drama in the Community Center Department of the D.C. Public Schools. But that's not to say my artistic vision wasn't threatened. My choice of narrative structure and presentation of fact was questioned by both Forrest and Wilkinson.
My dear Mrs. Terrell, there are historical discrepancies regarding the presence of Mr. and Mrs. Wheatley in scenes in which, in truth, they would not have been present.
You know, if this office is anxious, there should be no valid ground for criticism of the historical accuracy of the incidents in the Phyllis Wheatley pageant.
Precisely the years 1774 and 1778, to be exact.
My dear Mrs. Forrest, everything which appears in the pageant is historically correct, but the events have not been arranged in chronological order. I have a perfect right to do that, as I understand it. I have arranged the events so as to produce the best dramatic effect. In John Drinkwater's play on Abraham Lincoln, he represents Seward as saying, now he belongs to the ages after Lincoln had died. Seward was not present when Lincoln died, but Seward did say, now he belongs to the ages. And Drinkwater felt he had a perfect right to represent Seward at the death scene because it made a fine dramatic climax. So, I don't have the right to present the events out of chronological order? Please tell me so. If I have sinned against the canons of dramatic art, I am perfectly willing to change the order of the acts. Incidentally, I don't think the dates in which the events occurred amount to a row of pins as compared with the dramatic effect. Of course, if some sticklers insist upon having the play arranged in chronological order, I can do it. It will not be nearly as interesting to the audience, but I bow to the will of the majority. This was all especially difficult because I also had to be away for much of the rehearsal. I was working in a crucial leadership position for the nation's presidential campaign. I was director of work among colored women in the East for the election of Herbert Hoover. I was living in New York while the pageant was in production in D.C. So it was clear that liberties were being taken in my absence, and it was nearly impossible to deal with all the production questions and issues.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, the Phyllis Weekly pageant is quite underway. The committee made me vice chairman to act in your place. There have been many delays due to selection of characters and revisions.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, I know that we had planned for the pageant to be presented in the Sylvan Theater at the base of the Washington Monument, but we are moving it to the Washington Auditorium. Sincerely, Garnet T. Wilkinson.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, I think I failed to emphasize the very great interest Miss Forrest is manifesting in your pageant. I asked her to give me the name of one of her committee who would meet with my main committee and give me a demonstration on me perchance.
Dear
Sincerely,
Mrs.
Carrie
Terrell,
Watson.
we were glad to receive the 2 copies of the Phyllis Weekly transcript this morning. They came at the psychological moment as we needed for our first rehearsal today. However, we agreed upon 20 copies. At present, we are somewhat handicapped with just 2 manuscript copies.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, please let me have a written statement authorizing the insertion of a few words to the script. Just a few, where necessary, of course, and I assure you that they'll be historically accurate. Sincerely, Mrs. McGuire.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, my budget called for $22 in covering creams, grease, powders, pencils, etc. Mrs. Forrest said, "My dear, many amateurs overdue with makeup." Sincerely, Carrie Watson.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, we should greatly appreciate a statement from you as to your authority for connecting Mr. and Mrs. Wheatley with events coming after 1774 and 1778, respectively. Garnet Wilkinson.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, found our African Herald, a handsome black professor from Howard picked him out from his students. I'm planning on a fellow garb for him, using oriental shades of oranges, green, blue, brown, and red. We'll put strapped sandals on his feet, will bear one limb and one arm as he struts around in his mantle. A turban white with gold ring to finish him off. I can see it now. Carrie Watson.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, I wish to apologize for my apparent ignorance. Accept my deepest regrets for having made a statement that you were unknown in our communities. Sincerely, Sheldon Hoskins.
Dear Mrs. Terrell, the pageant has changed from the Washington Auditorium to the Armstrong High School. Mr. Wilkinson had thought.
It is best to change in the face of depression.
Sincerely, Carrie Watts.
It was a tragedy that I could not be there to assist in production. But I had to remember it was Phyllis's story to tell, not mine. It would have been a disservice to her story to just focus on her time in America. She was someone before she came here. So the pageant begins in an African village. The first person to speak is an African herald, serving his griot to welcome us to the story.
Good friends, through me as a herald, Africa greets you tonight and bids you rejoice in the marvelous achievements of her incomparable daughter, Phyllis. History forces me, tonight, to draw your attention just for a moment to the injustices and the cruelties heaped upon the sons and daughters of Africa during a long and mournful past. Tonight, you will see an African girl whose career reads more like fiction than fact. When but a child of tender years, she was stolen from her native land by slave traders, brought across the sea by dealers in human flesh, and sold in Boston as a slave. The family that bought her allowed her to develop her mind. So exceptional was her native ability, so high her aspiration, so indomitable her courage, so great her determination, determination that a volume of poems which Phyllis wrote was produced and published in England when she was but 20 years old. With pardonable pride, Africa bids me state that if any other human of whatever race has ever made such marvelous intellectual progress and achieved such great literary success in such a short time under similar circumstances as Phyllis Wheatley did, the record of human history does not show it. Again, with pardonable pride, Africa bids ye rejoice in the imperishable fame of her immortal daughter.
Act 1 takes place in an African village. This scene in the pageant allowed for me to utilize the musical compositions of two brown artists I have long admired. Here was a chance to have their superior work heard more widely. I worked with A.H. Johnson in developing the musical score to the pageant. In the opening of the scene, the orchestra plays Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Legend. script describes, there are 2 thatched huts balanced by a large tree on left side of the stage. There are clubs for the native men, bowls and primitive pottery for the women who may be weaving. And there is a chanting of prayer as part of the religious ceremony as the scene opens. Groups of Africans may be dancing, singing, working, and gossiping. Children are playing. Parents take part in the fun. Phyllis runs out to join them. We utilize Coleridge Taylor's Bambula for this moment. know what were possible children's games or pastimes they might engage in. In pursuit of this information, I contacted Professor William Hansberry of Howard University, considered to be our leading scholar on African studies.
My dear Miss Terrell, I have enclosed herewith the African names and games I promised you. A student of mine, Ben Azikiwe, is a native African and a young man of much learning and reliability. You may therefore accept without question the authoritative character of his material.
My dear Professor Hansberry, I am glad to receive yet acknowledge the receipt of your kind letter requesting information regarding African names and games. Chinwe
Literally means God owns you. God is the creator of human life.
Anyaung
Literally means sunshine, as beautiful as the sun that shines above.
Eguna
Don't kill. Don't trample those who are weaker than you.
Opudi
Our work of honor is sacred. Contacts are made to be respected, not to be trampled upon.
Chukwuemeka
God is gracious. All is due to God for giving us a child, you.
Otiopo
A pugilistic fighter. Your grandsires lived and defended our country by the sword. Their blood is sacred, and you must uphold their heritage.
Slave catchers creep upon the scene. They capture the Africans, chain them together, and take them away. The mothers of several children appear, look for their little ones, discover they are gone, realize what has happened. The dreaded slave catchers have taken their loved ones away. They wring their hands, call upon their gods, utter pitiable cries, sob, and weep. It ends with R. Nathaniel Dett's mournful L'Envoi chorale. If you had been walking down the streets of Boston one day in 1761, you might have seen a poor little black girl wrapped only in a piece of carpet, shivering with cold. If you had asked, "What is your name, little girl?" she would not have understood you. And even if she had understood you and answered your question, the little foreigner's name would have sounded very queer to you. She had been stolen from her native land, had suffered the horrors and tortures of what is called the Middle Passage, and had been brought by white men into this country to be sold as a slave. She did not know when or where she was born. She only knew she came from somewhere in Africa. She must have been born either in 1753 or 1754, it is thought. She was probably between 7 and 8 years of age when she was dragged, more dead than alive, from the slave ship in Boston. I could not shy away from depicting the vile slave market and imagining the voices of our ancestors as they recounted their experience of the Middle Passage. I imagined slaves on the docks with young Phyllis. An enslaved native African has come down to the wharf to talk to the newly arrived captives. They relate the horrors of the stormy voyage and the great loss of many of their kin. Leaving the dock, he meets an African friend.
The ocean voyage was terrible, they say. There was an awful storm. The waves were so high, they almost touched the sky. The slaves, they were packed in that ship just like those little fish you buy in a can. What do you call them, Blaston?
Oh, you call them sardines, as their name.
Ah, yes, that's it, they are. Packed in that ship just like those sardines you'd buy in a can in a store. They could hardly move. They had to stand up until they fell. Most of them died on the way over and were thrown overboard.
Poor things. That was worse than the storm when we came over. And that was bad enough.
Well, those poor things will have to get used to this country, just like we did.
As the Africans leave, the white people who have come to the market to buy slaves enter and walk up and down looking them over.
This fella seems good enough for the work I need him to do.
He's a little thin, ain't it?
That's just because they had such a hard time in the Middle Passage. Only the strongest of them lived to tell the tale. Hundreds of them died on the way over, you know.
This fellow will be all right once he gets his sea legs off. And has a couple of good meals under his belt.
I'll take him anyway.
Mrs. Wheatley enters and is seen examining the African girls in the slave market. She seems very much impressed with several and points out their good qualities to her female companion.
She's just about the age I want. She will develop into a strong woman.
What kind of work do you want her to do?
I have come to buy a young woman to take the place of my old cook, Dorcas, who is getting too feeble to work. I want Dorcas to train the girl before she gets too old, so I won't have any trouble with her.
Look at that poor little girl. See how she's just shivering with the cold?
Well, no wonder she feels the cold so keenly. She has just come from a very warm climate, you know. The change from that fierce heat to this intense cold is enough to give her pneumonia and kill her.
She hasn't any clothes on either. Nothing but this piece of carpet wrapped around her.
Well, she is altogether too young and frail for the work I want her to do. I wish I could feel justified in buying her, though. But she has such a fine, intelligent face. Oh, that child's eyes will haunt me as long as I live if I leave her here shivering in the cold. I just can't do it. When my Mary was her age, suppose she had been snatched away from me and sold into some slavery, into some faraway country, as this poor little thing has been. I just can't do it. I know. I'll give her to Nathaniel and Mary, my twins. She can wait on them.
Phyllis was very fortunate in having Mrs. Wheatley as her mistress. Let us pause long enough to give a rousing, rising vote of thanks to that lady. The law did not force her to be merciful to the little slave, and certainly nobody expected her to give the girl a chance to develop her mind. In her new home, Phyllis became the special servant of Mrs. Wheatley's twins, Nathaniel and Mary, who were 10 years older than their slave. What a debt of gratitude Phyllis's race and the whole world owe to Mary Wheatley for seeing Phyllis's potential. Enter Nathaniel with a book he has been reading. His sister Mary enters.
What are you reading, Nathaniel?
Nathaniel places the book down. Phyllis has entered and has been looking at the book intently.
I've been reading about these bloodthirsty savages, the Indians, how they steal up upon poor, unsuspecting white people, murder and scalp them.
Well, it's no wonder the Indians behave as they do. White people have committed some awful crimes against them, you know. White people came here and stole their land. This country is theirs, not ours. Then white people cheat them every chance they get. And they get a lot of chances, too.
Mary points to Phyllis and directs Nathaniel's attention to her.
What are you doing, Phyllis? Are you reading Nathaniel's book?
No, Miss Mary, I cannot read, but I should like to learn how.
Did you hear that, Nathaniel? Phyllis says she'd like to learn to read.
Phyllis leaves the room and goes into the yard with the book. Mary has walked toward the door while she was talking and looks out into the yard. She sees Phyllis trying to make letters on the wall with a piece of chalk, and she copies them from the book she holds in her hand. Mary beckons vigorously to Nathaniel.
Come here quick, Nathaniel. For goodness sakes, look at Phyllis. She's actually trying to write. Have you ever seen something so funny in your life? She's making the letter M, I do believe. Wouldn't it be fun to teach a little African to read?
Well, you can even teach animals some things. Even they have a certain amount of intelligence. Africans are human beings, you know. There's no reason in the world why they should not be taught some things anyhow.
I've never heard of a black person reading in all my life. Many people say that they have no brains, and there are ever so many who do believe that they have no souls, and that's why it's okay to make them slaves. But even if we could teach Phyllis to read, we could never teach her to do sums and arithmetic. She has far little brains enough for that, I know.
Well, never mind about teaching her to do sums in arithmetic. Sister dear, you were never a bright and shining light in arithmetic, you know. Father says women are a pain in mathematics on general principles, no matter how hard they try to master it. The trouble is, there's something radically wrong in a woman's brain. In a white woman's brain, I mean. Why in the world should we worry a poor little African girl by trying to teach her to do sums?
And even those of her race question Phyllis's spirit. Dorcas, the Wheatley's cook, scolds Phyllis. Put that book away, Phyllis, and go to bed right now. It's almost morning. If you keep us staying up late the way you've been doing, you're going to get sick. You hear me?
Don't be angry with me, Dorcas, and don't worry yourself about me. I'm not going to get sick, okay?
Oh, yes, you will. That's what comes of learning black folks to read and write. Ain't no good gonna come of it. Why teach black folks to read and write? God never intended for black folks to read and write. I don't know how to read it, and I ain't gonna learn neither. Now, you come on to bed right now. I'm gonna tell Miss Wheatley on you. See if I don't. But Phyllis declared, but please remember, however highly favored or intelligent, Phyllis was still expected and obliged to perform her duties as a slave. But Phyllis declared in her poem,
On being brought from Africa to America. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew, Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolical dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train.
Both the extent and the variety of the slave girl's knowledge are amazing. In her poems, her references to science, literature, mythology, religion, and current events prove that she must have had leisure to read, as well as to write. And that in her case, certainly, reading made a full mind. She studied Latin and read Ovid with ease and pleasure. Her strong interest in the pursuit of knowledge is shown in her poem,
To the University of Cambridge in Boston,
which was written when she was about 13 or 14 years old, only 6 years after she had landed a barbarian from Africa. In her opening line, she invokes the Muses.
An intrinsic ardor prompts me to write. The Muses promise to assist my pen.
And then addresses herself to the young men attending Cambridge University, warning them to not throw away the advantages they have been given.
Students, to you it is given to scan the heights above, to traverse the ethereal space and mark the systems of revolving worlds. Approve upon your privileges while they stay ye pupils, and each hour redeem that which bears good or bad report of you to heaven. Let sin, that baleful evil of the soul, by you be shunned, nor once remit your God. Ye blooming plants of human race divine, an Ethiop tells you it is your greatest foe. Its transient sweetness turns to endless pain, and an immense perdition sinks the soul.
This is the part of the Ethiop story which makes one's heart open to life's possibilities. Phyllis wrote a tribute to George Washington and mailed it to him. In this poetical tribute to George Washington, she displayed a knowledge of history and mythology such as few women living in this country at that time possessed. In expressing her admiration for the man who was fighting to wrest the colonies from British oppression, she sings,
Fame for thy valor, for thy virtues more. Hear every tongue thy guardian aid implore. Proceed, great chief, with virtue on thy side. Thy every action let the goddess guide. A crown, a mansion, a throne that shine with gold unfading. Washington, be thine.
With this poem, she also sent a letter to General Washington, sent from Providence, Rhode Island, and dated October 26, 1775.
Sir, I have taken the freedom to address your excellency in the enclosed poems and entreat your acceptance. Your being appointed by the Grand Continental Congress to be Generalissimo of the armies of North America, together with the fame of your virtues, excites sensations not easy to suppress. Your generosity, therefore, I presume, will pardon the attempt. Wishing your excellency all possible success in the great cause you are so generously engaged in, I am, your excellency, your most obedient and humble servant, Phyllis Wheatley.
The young African's letter and poem to the commander-in-chief of the American armies remained unanswered until February 28th, because he was in the midst of the most active preparation for attacking the enemy. Then, accidentally,
In searching over a parcel of papers in order to destroy such as were useless, I brought the poem to light again.
feeling it was his duty to acknowledge receipt of the black girl's poetical effusion in his honor, the future president addressed her as,
Miss Phyllis,
and declared in the letter he wrote to her,
I thank you for your polite notice of me in the elegant lines you enclosed. And however undeserving I may be of such panegyric, the style and nature exhibit striking proof of your poetical talents, in honor of and as a tribute justly due you. If you ever find yourself in Cambridge or close to headquarters, I would be so happy to meet someone so favored by the Muses, and to whom nature has been liberal and beneficent in her dispensations. I am, with great respect, your loyal and humble servant, George Washington.
Those who admire the character of the first president of the United States never tire of talking about his courtesy, the kindness of his heart, his susceptibility to the influence of true genius, and his friendly ministrations of every kind. But nothing he ever did proved more conclusively that he was a really great and good man than this letter which he wrote to a young black girl who was still a slave. And what a remarkable specimen of the human family she was. At this point in the pageant, we are at General George Washington's headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On stage, there is the general effect of camp life. A long colonial table is near the center of the room. 2 Windsor chairs at either end. On the table are a candlestick, ink, quill, and a battle campaign map. 2 stacks of muskets, 4 in each stack, and 1 stack on each side of the room.
General Washington, the ladies you're expecting, right?
Have them come in immediately. It gives me great pleasure to have you here at headquarters, I assure you. I have the privilege of meeting Mrs. Wheatley and Mr. Wheatley.
You are so kind to have invited us here, and we are greatly honored to be received by you. General Washington, this is Phyllis, who wrote a poem in your honor, and to whom you sent such a beautiful letter of appreciation to.
It's good to see you, Miss Phyllis. Your letter was a beautiful tribute to me, which I greatly appreciated. I apologize I did not acknowledge receipt of it sooner. It is good to see a young woman, so favored by the Muses as you, and I hope that you continue to develop your gift of poetry more and more.
Thank you, General Washington, for your kind words of praise. I cannot tell you how grateful I am.
Of course, by the time Phyllis met General, later President Washington, she had already become well known across much of North America for her poetry writing, especially due to the publication of her collection of poems in a book made possible by British sponsorship.
Poems on various subjects, religious and moral, by Phyllis Wheatley, Negro servant of Mr. John Wheatley of Boston in New England.
When she was 20 years old, Phyllis's health began to fail. It is quite likely also that the sudden transition from the heat of tropical Africa to the penetrating cold of New England, which the little girl had to face wrapped only in a few rags, wrought an injury to her health from which she never completely recovered. Some thought a sea voyage would do her good, and so it was decided that Mr. Nathaniel Wheatley, who happened to be going abroad on business, should take Phyllis with him to England, where she had the time of her young life. She was the guest of the Countess of Huntington. The Countess of Huntingdon lavished upon her kindnesses and favors of every conceivable kind.
I want you to know, Miss Phyllis, that you are being entertained by one of the greatest women in all of England. She is both great and good. The Duke of Huntingdon has left her a vast fortune, and she has used most of it for the benefit of mankind. She has used nearly all of it for the public good, but it has been said that in order for her to do most of the work, she has had to dispose of some of her priceless jewels.
Oh, she is also a patron of the arts, as you have just heard, Miss Phyllis. Handel was encouraged and patronized by her, but he was only one of the musicians whom she has helped develop his art. The Countess of Huntingdon has tried to make the world a better place for having lived in it, if ever a human being did try to come to that end, and she has done so brilliantly.
Through these connections, Phyllis was received by the Lord Mayor of London, who presented her with the first edition in folio of Milton's Paradise Lost. This book is now in the library of Harvard University. Lord Dartmouth entertained Phyllis, as did other people of distinction. In fact, she was petted, honored, and feted by the culture and aristocracy of Great Britain. All arrangements had been made for the young African to be presented to the King and Queen of England. But Phyllis was denied the pleasure of seeing George III and his queen, because just before the appointed time had arrived, news reached her that her mistress, Mrs. Susanna Wheatley, was ill, and she hastened home to attend her. Soon after she reached Boston, her mistress died. Meanwhile, the Countess of Huntingdon was instrumental in introducing Phyllis's poetry to the world.
I have just received this dainty volume of poems from our little African friend, Phyllis Wheatley, who you will doubtless recall was our guest here a short while ago. I decided to have these poems published and gained the consent of her master, Mr. John Wheatley of Boston, and Mrs. Susanna Wheatley, her mistress.
Do you mean to tell me that such a talented young woman as Phyllis Wheatley is still held as a slave?
Yes, that is true. The Wheatleys of Boston and New England are very fond of her, but they have not yet emancipated her.
Where were these poems published?
They were published here in London. A dedication appears in the title page of the book. Nothing would delight me more than this charming dedication that appears in this precious little volume. Listen to this. To the Right Honorable Countess of Huntingdon, the following poems are most respectfully inscribed. I am your very obliged, very humble, most obedient servant, Phyllis Wheatley, Boston, June 12, 1773. After Phyllis sent me this dedication and the names of 18 distinguished men who vouched for the authenticity of the poems, I had them published. It would have been a sin, yes, it would have been a crime if these poems had been lost to posterity. Nothing that has come into my life has delighted me more than my friendship with this charming, talented African girl.
Knowing that many would doubt that an African girl really wrote the poems, Mr. Wheatley arranged for some of the most distinguished people in New England to vouch for that fact. In one of the preliminary pages of the book, His Excellency the Governor, Thomas Hutchinson, and John Hancock, the first signer of the Declaration of Independence, and future President John Adams, together with 16 others, affixed their names on the following statement.
We, whose names are underwritten, do assure the world that the poems specified in the following pages were, as we verily believe, written by Phyllis, a young Negro girl who was but a few years since brought an uncultivated barbarian from Africa, and has ever since been, and now is, under the disadvantage of serving as a slave in a family in this town. She has been examined by the best judges and is thought qualified to write them.
I believe I understand what Phyllis might have felt at this moment. When I was a student at Oberlin College, I was asked to recite Greek before the great British writer Matthew Arnold. He was visiting our campus. Following my recitation, he remarked,
I would never have believed that a person of African descent could speak Greek.
like Phyllis. I had been examined by the best judges and thought qualified to speak. Thank you, Matthew Arnold. Thank you, John Adams. Though you presumed a condescension on both of us, you at least recognized our achievements. How does Phyllis's story end? Historically, the union of man and wife has represented the conclusion of many a classic drama. I concluded the Phyllis Wheatley pageant with her wedding day. And yes, historically, Mr. and Mrs. Wheatley were not actually present for the ceremony, but they were in my pageant. It just rounds the story out. And it's best to end there, because Phyllis's life story does not end happily. Her unhappiness has to do with her husband, John Peters. The estimates placed upon the ability and character of this husband are about as contradictory and varied as they could well be. According to some, he was
a Negro who kept a shop, wore a wig, carried a cane, and felt himself superior to all kinds of labor.
Others claim
he was a grocery keeper,
A baker,
Journeyman?
a man of all jobs.
at some time in his life, there is evidence that he was a lawyer, and at another time in his career, he tried his hand at medicine. John Peters is also depicted as
A man who not only bore a good character, but was a very remarkable specimen of his race, being a fluent writer, a ready speaker, and an intelligent man.
Under the title of Dr. Peters, he pled the cause of his brethren, the Africans, before the tribunals of state.
But whatever doubt may exist about the ability and character of Phyllis's husband, it is certain
He lost all of his property during the Revolution, was imprisoned for debt, and was unable to support his family.
Phyllis lived only 5 years after her marriage. And during those years, she drank deeply from the cup of sorrow. Practically every member of the Wheatley family had passed away. Not only had her husband lost everything which he possessed, but she had sold all her precious books trying to pay his debts. Her 3 children were frail little things who were almost continuously ill. Phyllis was probably too shy and sensitive to turn to her friends for help. She was working in an ordinary boarding house when she died in her 31st year, December 5th, 1784, penniless and alone. In estimating the value of Phyllis's poems, it is necessary and just to consider the period in which they were written and to compare them with others which appeared at the same time. Phyllis Wheatley wrote before the dawn of the American Revolution, and her poems were published 3 years before the Declaration of Independence. At that time, very few colonists engaged in literary work, and those who wrote poetry simply imitated the English bards. There was no original literature among them at all. The best American poets were often viewed as mere imitators and echoes of the English classicists. In considering the life and achievements of Phyllis Wheatley, one must remember that the conditions under which she wrote were such as have confronted a woman of no other race who has distinguished herself as a poet. Although the family with whom Phyllis lived treated her kindly, recognized her ability, taught her to read and write, and afforded her considerable opportunity to develop her talent, nevertheless, she was a bondswoman and was obliged to perform the duties assigned to a slave. In all literature, it would be difficult to find a more pathetic picture of talent yoked to drudgery than which the little slave poet conjures before our eyes.
Africa bids ye rejoice in the imperishable fame of her immortal daughter.
Crucially, She was a full-blooded African, so that her talent and attainments cannot be attributed to the mixture of Caucasian or any other blood in her veins. An African woman. It has been my distinct pleasure to speak to you this evening. Dear young ladies of Delta Sigma Theta, I leave you with Phyllis's own words, which remind our spirits, our brains, and our hearts to rise.
Arise, my soul, on wings enraptured rise, to praise the monarch of the earth and the skies, whose goodness and beneficence appear, as round its center moves the rolling year. Or when the sun glows with rosy charms, or the sun slumbers in the ocean's arms. Of light divine, be a rich portion lent, to guide my soul, favor my intent. Celestial muse, my arduous flight sustain, and raise my mind to seraphic strain.
Thank you. And good night.
Break while we put some chairs up here. If you can stay for our talk back, we would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So do the QR codes as you leave, please. Barbara, do you want to take this one?
Well, we would just like to thank you all for coming. It's been a very busy semester. We have had such a wonderful time. Where's Sarah? Sarah Robbins and I, we go way back on the Wayback Machine. And this all came about because last semester, Sarah and I started talking about how this was the sesquicentennial of the publication of Phyllis Wheatley's Poems on Various Thoughts, Religious and Moral. It's been 250 years since that book was published. And we thought, okay, what's everybody doing around the country? Yeah. And it turned out that the answer was not a lot. So, us being us, we decided, well, this is an opportunity. We have a lot to say about Phyllis Wheatley Peters. And so, for an entire year, we've had about, 14, 15 events, virtual and online, that have pulled scholars from around the country, from the United Kingdom and from Canada. We've worked with the American Antiquarian Society. Hopefully we'll get the Smithsonian on board. We're in talks with them. And we've just had a wonderful time. We have to shout out to our brilliant colleague, Sujata Ayengo. Who actually brought this piece by Mary Church Terrell to our attention. And yes, it was you who started that conversation. It was in the summertime. Remember? We work year-round, people. We're always thinking.
I think it was even before
Even
that.
before.
I think it was last winter.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have the emails to prove it.
Yes, we put this on our radar and said, look, this is we love to do what we call archives-based performance. Dr. Sahakian was somewhere. She might have left.
Yes, she
But we call this archives-based performance. You saw the material being projected. Students had a hand in selecting that material, doing research, and combining it with the research that Dr. Contini did. One reason we are celebrating Phyllis Wheatley is because Phyllis Wheatley Peters, we now use both of her surnames, her married name, Peters, as well as her the name of her enslavers, the Wheatleys. One reason we are celebrating Phyllis Wheatley Peters is because we want to call attention to the fact that she is not a relic, that her legacy, as our brilliant Mary Church Terrell said at the end of the performance, her legacy is still very much ongoing. And there are afterlives of Phyllis Wheatley that pop up all over the world. You saw 3 different statues of Phyllis Wheatley. They're in the United States, they're in the United Kingdom, there are exhibitions about Phyllis Wheatley, and of course there are contemporary writers and artists like Georgia's own Honoré Fanon Jeffers, as well as Georgia. Honoré Fanon Jeffers, who has written a wonderful imagined, fictionalized account of Wheatley's life called The Age of Phyllis, which many of us here at the University of Georgia are teaching in our classes. So we wanted to call attention foremost to the relevance of Phyllis Wheatley's life and work today, and also always reminding you and ourselves that the story of African Americans is a story of struggle. And by that we mean it's a story of liberation, but it's a story of trauma. And you cannot talk about any aspect of contemporary African American history, Black Lives Matter, the Civil Rights Movement, without thinking about the resonance and the reverberations of the Middle Passage, the Second Middle Passage, which my colleagues in history like Dr. Stephen Berry are studying, and slavery. We want to call attention to the fact that to understand African American history and culture, it is important to be able to connect the dots. That's what we do. Those of us who teach about social justice and history and race, connect the dots. Understand how we got here. If you don't understand how we got here, then you're going to be clueless as to solutions going forward. And so I'll get off my soapbox because y'all opened that can of worms. And what I'll do is I'll pitch it to you. I'm going to do the teacher thing and start asking questions here. We're very curious about what you think Phyllis Wheatley means to your generation. What does she mean to us now? Do you get it? Is this just, and just is probably not the right adverb to use, but when you think about Phyllis Wheatley, can you think about ways in which Phyllis Wheatley matters to us now, and what her importance might be to us now? What can we take away from the story that just unfolded here? And I have to say, one of the brilliant strokes that our director has made is to bring together community members. You're one. Robert Harold is another community member, as well as students. And I didn't realize until this weekend that most of the actors in this program from UGA are acting for the first time here. This is amazing.
Give them a hand.
Finally, we have to shout out to our brilliant musicians.
Yes.
Weidman. Okay, I'm always mispronouncing his name. Professor Weidman, brilliant jazz pianist, who has been very careful to teach these young people the history of these early African American composers, Samuel Coleridge Taylor and Nathaniel Dent. Really, I think one of these pieces is very seldom played. I remember you saying that during one of the rehearsals. Yes.
Well, Dr. Catini found it in the back of a book,
In the
correct?
back of a book.
Wow.
In the back of
Right.
a book, and I'm so glad that you found it. I mean,
Wow.
thanks to you.
Yeah.
I have never heard it. I mean, this probably hadn't been performed since 1932, 33.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's that archival performance.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yes.
It was
Is
the
this-
uh,
No question
the
came, which one
chorale,
was that?
the chorale that was
Chorale.
you heard
Long
over
boy,
over
yes.
the entrapment scene. That was it was cited in her script, but it's never been published. And I found it it was the very last piece of music in a book about old Negro spirituals. Old Negro spirituals, I believe, was the name of the book. And it was from like the 1920s, and that was it. And so James wonderfully rounded together 4 singers and then melded their voices together. He had each of them sing separately and then put it all together. He's so brilliant. I can't do that stuff. But yeah, so that to me was a really special find. I love the fact that we've never heard that music. No, I can't think of a place where we would hear that music today. So I think that's really
So you've made history today.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Well, it was beautifully executed.
Yes.
Really, thank you very much.
Yes, very talented, very accomplished.
I want to hear from some of the students what it was like to be in this event tonight. So we should probably start with Phyllis. Tell us.
It was a wonderful experience just working with everyone and seeing all of the research that went into this project. George sent us so many, not even one, just so many documents of like the background history. We got like all the pictures and the information, and just getting to look through that entire archive was amazing.
Let's hear from some of the others. Our griot.
Oh, I'm not a student.
Yeah.
No, it was very much an honor to actually be able to be a part of this. One of the things that I really appreciated about the piece was that it did not shy away from being historically accurate. It did not try and bring kindness into this particular space to try and make it like a clean end to it. It was honest and true to the end, because unfortunately we have so many African Americans, especially African American women in our history, who have had some unkind ends come to their lives, as brilliant as they may have been. So I can appreciate the honesty that the piece actually brought to it. And it was really awesome working with everybody, being able to work through this and being able to have a lot of fun bringing history to life. So it's a lot of fun.
I think it's really, really important. I'm going to just jump in. Is that to remember that those scenes that you watched from the pageant, which are straight from the pageant, were originally performed by young children. Mm-hmm. And so when you have the scene between Mary and Nathaniel saying these horrible assumptions about black people, and to think that Terrell thought, she was going, that's what I think is so amazing. She was making that choice to have these young black students say those words in front of an audience. And I just think that is so powerful. And we don't, you think about today and how often we are scared or frightened about bringing stuff like that to the stage. And often we think, oh, we're stepping on toes. To think the power she found in telling that story. I tonight especially, I was standing up there thinking, I can't believe this was done by little kids. I just can't imagine. So really, really super important stuff.
I'd like to hear, I imagine it was hard, playing benevolent white racist woman, if there is such a thing, or the young Mary. How did you find the force to speak those kinds of words?
I would say that, George helped us a lot too, with being very matter of fact. We weren't going too mean with it. It's, that's not the tone, because everything in that age is just how it was. So obviously I'm not thinking oh no, I'm racist. While while I'm playing the role, and just like really just, you know, matter of factly saying, I don't know, yeah. But, how do you feel?
For me, it was hard to think of how I would deliver it loud and proud, per se. Just because it's like, I imagine there's going to be people here watching this, and I have to perform it as she would have. So I just kind of went back to like a childish mindset, like like uneducated young mindset, to where it was a little bit easier for me and came off more natural for me.
And Nathaniel, I hated you.
For me, it was an honor to be able to capture history like that as a snapshot with its imperfections. Seriously, this whole project I think is a testament to that, and I'm glad that I was able to do that as my character. The things that I said, would I say them in real life? Absolutely not. But I am proud that I was able to show this character and show that development. We are all works in progress, and so are our characters.
And we also dealt, I mean, that kind of goes along with it. Stylistically, one of the things we talked about was the style of the pageant. And these pageants weren't realistic. You know, there was no such thing as microphones, and they were in a large space with people passing through. And so it was very presentational. And so even within that, there's a falseness, I think, for actors, which is an easy way to kind of put that wall up. Like, you know, I can just go to this false place and everyone will know that I really don't think this, you know?
I want to add, learning about this pageant style, I've never interacted with anything like this before. Absolutely amazing experience to be able to learn about this. And I think that is a testament to your dramaturgical work as well. Like, your folder was so, yours was an amazing mind. Your folder was so comprehensive. I learned so much. And yeah, no, this pageant stuff was really cool. I'd never seen it before in my life.
Yeah, I mean, and it really, it's lost. I mean, it was very popular, especially in the black community in the early 20th century.
Yes.
But it is pretty much lost. You saw the pictures from Du Bois's Star of Ethiopia, you know, but he was the major voice there. And so we do have some materials that he left behind, but there were hundreds of these pageants that were done in different communities. In Atlanta, I know there were the church pageants.
Big Bethel.
Yeah. You know,
really went all out.
And they're amazing too. So it's something, you know, I say to the acting students in the audience, you know, check it out. It's a history that you really don't hear about, and it's kind of cool.
And you still see them too.
Yeah.
Easter,
Well, in
Christmas.
church.
Yeah, church.
Methodist and
Yeah.
Baptist still do the pageants,
still
but
have
not
pageants.
as frequently.
Yeah.
Mainly for Easter and Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, I was fascinated by and loved the layering of the club women story and the role of Terrell in that embodiment of the uplift movement. So Frida,
Lifting as we climb.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what it was like becoming Terrell for us?
Well, as you can see, those of you who know me, this is not my head. I spent 3 days in the sky, just trying to hang on to it. But it's going to be gone in a couple days. But seriously, the club women were women of great elegance and dignity, and you know, the old school club women, and greatness. They did so much for the community, and they dedicated themselves to service. And so you have Mary Church Terrell, but a number of others like Mary McLeod Bethune and many others who were of this category. And so I just tried to channel as much of her inner dignity and her forthrightness. And you saw that she was well educated. Her family was of the upper echelon of the black community. So she was very well educated and grew up as one of Du Bois's talented 10th. These were the people that he race to a better place, and they believed in what they were doing, and they did a lot of really wonderful things. So I had known about Terrell, and the first question I asked Barbara is it Terrell or Terrell?
Let's do some research on that.
Okay, because I said, I'm not going out there. And then somebody said, no.
It's too late now.
So, right. But no, they did the research, so it's Terrell.
Terrell.
Yes.
Another example of the research.
Yes.
Right. But if you read her biography,
Yes.
it is a biography of achievement after achievement after achievement. And so when somebody said to her, well, you do it, she did it. She sure did. And that was her life.
Her biography, for those who have access to the UGA libraries, is free online. You can access it. It's called A Black Woman in a White Man's World. And it is an amazing story. Amazing story. There really would have been no NAACP had it not been for Mary Church Terrell founding the National Association for Colored Women first. So one thing led to another, really. But now I want to throw, so questions, thoughts, what did you like? Tell us. There may be life for this whole thing again.
Yes, for sure.
So any reflections, anything you remember, any things that were meaningful, questions, yes?
Can we hear from the choreographer and about the dancing as well?
He's not here,
Oh, yeah.
but I can tell you a little.
Everything, yeah.
So our choreographer was Jason Aya, who is a professor in the dance department here at UGA. He teaches African dance there. The dances, as he explained to us, were based on the games he played, and he's from Ghana.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And so all the things he taught them were the little sheets that they have. That was something that he and his friends would do, and he literally came into rehearsal and he said, I'm just going to do stuff that I did when I was a kid. And he just started teaching them all these little games. And it was lovely to watch. So it's very, very true to life.
It was fabulous. And then reading it, the scene I found most moving were the names, and I teared up almost, watching them. You guys do it this time. So I love the scene with the names. And what language, though? Because I didn't...
Yeah, it's Yoruba, right? Yeah. See, Shalom? She teared up during that scene. What else? Any other thoughts, comments? Yes?
Love the constant changes of pace, the music, and then the dancing with the giggling. I love the giggling. Great. The speechifying that was always, and then the text. I loved the way it jumped around, frankly. You had enough coherence in Phyllis Wheatley.
Great. And the speech that Frida was giving as Mary Church Terrell is straight up. That is a speech that she did many, many times. She made minor, I've read about 10 different versions of it. She made minor changes over the years, but that was the one that kind of fit what we needed.
Her character just came out so strongly in it.
Yeah.
Whereas the other, the anecdotal parts were lovely in themselves, but they were lovely in a totally different way.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Actually, I have two. One question is for everyone who did participate in what was it like sort of emotionally accessing the movement, particularly not necessarily for the dances as children, but when you had to, emotionally embody sort of like the experience of the enslaved.
That's a great question. Anyone take it?
Some of you that we haven't heard from yet, maybe could share a bit.
Anyone?
He said, no, I'm not going to speak.
Well, first off, I mean, this experience was great for me. Like, a lot of the stuff you guys saw me do is like my first time ever doing it, so I want to give it up to these guys for making me feel comfortable, to be able to do it. But, man, I said I'd just try to have fun, honestly. I think that was what I held on to the whole time. because it's easy to get lost in everything else. So I'll say that's what I held on to.
And again, so much of that moment was, I think this is why Jason's choreography was so strong, because I said to him, I said, I don't want to get into trying to show a realistic capture. I just want big, strong, bold images that kind of like hit the audience. And so I really loved what he came up with. That you know, and especially my favorite moment is the moment when we're all like this, and then they bring their hands down like that as their letter right. That to me was just so simple and elegant but powerful. And he had choreographed a piece a few years ago about an enslavement, and it was quite elongated and very intense. But he took some of the images from that and kind of simplified them for the group. So, yeah. Yes.
I have one for the musicians. How did it feel? How was your emotions that way in connecting music from an early era and tied to this kind of story? The Nicks and Debts pieces, the Coleridge Taylor.
Well, so Coleridge Taylor is actually the center of my doctoral research. So like, for me, it was just like another part of my research, I guess. So I mean, and also I love like Black history, especially in the field of classical music, because normal people don't know who Samuel Coleridge Taylor is. Normal people don't know who Nathaniel Dett is, or Florence
Now
Price.
people do though, yay.
Yeah. No, you guys do. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it's just a part of my life. So I guess it's not really like a deep emotional thing for me. It's just a part of my life because it's already something that I really like doing. I guess that's all I have to say.
Are you a performance major or musicology?
I'm a performance major with a minor in piano pedagogy, so I also teach piano. And actually, it's kind of like unrelated, but there are a lot more teaching pieces by Black composers that are starting to be included in like the pedagogical repertoire, which I really like, because I like, you know, want to teach music that people that I like, you know, are the same race as me wrote for like kids. So it's really nice.
And how about you being?
Well, I'm not a doctoral student. I'm not doing research in Samuel. But like, I actually got into like some like Black names starting from last year. There was this guy on YouTube who did a series of short pieces, and he was one of them. So I saw his name, and I'm like, oh, that's so pretty. And then there's this woman I think called Florence Price, who I heard in a recital last year, which you played in actually. There was like a doctoral class, I think. One of your piano classes had a recital in Edge Hall. Oh. Yeah, so I was there for that, and I heard a lot of work. Oh no, maybe it was someone else. I know you didn't play for Florida Price, but I remember you being there.
Yeah, so that was Jessie Clayport, yes. So I played a really lovely woman. She studied with William Dawson.
Yeah, I was there.
Zenobia Powell Perry. She's another name that you would love to look up. Zenobia Powell Perry? Is that right?
That sounds right.
Yeah. He says it's right. That's right. Zenobia Powell Perry.
But yeah, I heard a lot of that. Like, so like, and then Asia emailed me. She was like, hey, there's an opportunity. And I was like,
So,
yes,
Anna's
I want it.
amazing. She's so amazing.
It's beautiful.
So, I asked her, sorry, Professor Whiteman. So he asked me back in April if I wanted to be part of it, and I was like, oh, that's okay. You know, and he's like, you know, find a violinist. I was like, okay. That was April. So August rolled around, and I was like, oh, you know, I'll find somebody. And then September, I started like, please play for this. And then I think it was the end of September, or the first rehearsal that we had with this in this room was October 29th. And I think I asked you maybe like a few weeks before that. So she actually learned that in a very short amount of time. So I really appreciate it. She's amazing.
And the stars were aligned. It was so amazing that she was working Asia on Samuel Corliss Taylor and already knew some of the music. So everything just worked very beautifully when this came up.
Anything else? Yes.
I just want to say that you guys were phenomenal. First of all, that was a beautiful performance. Firstly, I just want to say, like, I really appreciated how the origin of Phyllis' story was touched on. Like, not only just starting her like off as somebody who's a slave, but also touching on like who she was prior to. Like, I feel like there's this common misconception that people are automatically enslaved, and like, there are some people who are born into slavery, yes, but there are people who have like a life prior to that, and like, I don't know, we just like you mentioned doctors with the title of slaves, and they are like doctors, teachers, scientists, etc. prior to being brought here. But I just want to say you guys really great. As an English major, I love Phyllis Wheatley. I've been reading a lot of her work for a long time, but I just want to say that you guys portrayed that beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you.
This guy has been waiting.
Yes.
To the actress who played Phyllis, if she were alive today, I mean, she really, really liked George Washington. As a young enslaved woman, she really liked George Washington. If she were alive today, how do you think she would feel about George Washington?
That's deep.
I'm going to add one piece to that. I'm also asking everyone your age how Phyllis Wheatley should feel about George Washington.
Good question. Now, actually, when I first read the script, I did come from like my 21st century perspective, especially just like on some of the poems, and like specifically like one of the first things I read was on being brought from Africa to America, and that first line, "'Twas mercy that brought me from my pagan land," and like I looked at that line and I was like, holy cow! But, like in my brain, I was like, that it didn't resonate with me, and then I had to reframe my brain and how that worked to look at it from a person who would have been fed a lot of her information from the books that were being written and published by non-African descent people that were surrounding her. So I was like, okay, just learning how to like rework and reframe my brain and appreciate her struggles and her achievements in her time frame, and not from necessarily my point of view.
Right, because Mary Church Terrell said some things I did not agree with. But I had to agree with them because I was speaking her words through her frame. By the way, W.E.B. Du Bois had a totally different view of George Washington, and he wrote a pageant of his own called George Washington and Black Folk. And so he had a total other perspective than Mary Church Terrell. But the fact that she was working in his pageant, there's a lot of history there of Star of Ethiopia, you know, and its productions. But that inspired her as to how she was going to conduct her pageant.
It's also interesting to note, kind of in line with that, there was an article, there's a scholar, Lorana O'Malley, is that right? Lorana? Her last name's O'Malley. I think it's Lorana. She wrote a beautiful scholarly article. She did research on this pageant as well. But she starts the article by reminding us. She says, "Oh, so you all think Hamilton was the first show that let black people play white political characters from early America?" And she was like, "Actually, Mary Church Terrell was the very first person who had the guts to put black people on stage playing white characters," and which I just think for our day and age is really something for us to step back and consider. Like this is something we have a history there, and I think that's really a strong statement. So.
your question is also though about like mindset, right? And so part of it is, you know, for us was actually trying to work through the mindset of where we will be as we were playing each portion. And so, because honestly, originally, as you know, as we were going through the scenes, I, as George Washington, was treating Phyllis Wheatley as if we were like cool. You know what I mean? Like, because in my mind, I'm reading this as, oh, this is great. He really likes her a lot, and he did. But he was still a white man, and he still treated her as a person who was not going to be equal to her. And so all the way up until honestly, even tonight, it was like, had to even kind of consider the thought that we can't be equal when we are sharing the stage. And so it's really, it's like kind of having that mindset of this person is not going to be my equal. You know, not only because I'm in the military and because of status, but honestly because I'm a white man. And I am looking at this black person as property. And so this black person isn't even a person. And so it's really, the 21st century mindset is to like kind of look back and be like, yeah, that's kind of messed up the way that, you know, this actually happened at that particular, but this is actually taking your mindset, as you were saying before, and actually putting in that particular space, because regardless of background, there might be some things that we might say differently. You know, Phyllis in the 21st century is probably going to like look at George Washington way different, but like part of that is like also from the space that they were actually inhabiting in that particular point. You know, Phyllis was actually coming from a space of admiration. George Washington was like this, you know, black property actually has a brain. And so, honestly, like, you know, it's really difficult to answer the question, because for us, we had to put ourselves in that particular mindset as we were portraying those particular people.
That's great. Thank you. Yes?
I just want to follow up on that a little bit. To what extent do you think that both Wheatley Peters and Terrell were being kind of pragmatic, right? That this is how we're going to move this forward. Do we have to do this sort of appeasement? And also exhausted, right? That it's easy, it's very hard. I mean, we're all like angry all the time, and it's just exhausting. You know, and so it can be a kind of respite to say, okay, I'm just gonna focus on that word freedom, right? In the Declaration, in George Washington, and maybe this is something that people will get to eventually, and for the time being, this is all I can do. I've been reading, my students want to talk about peace. We're reading Henry V. For obvious reasons, we're talking about war crimes. So I've been reading a lot of stuff about truce, compromise, peacemaking in preparation for that, which is why it's on my mind. And one of the phrases is modus vivendi, as an alternative to rights-based discourse, which is what, of course, we live in now, and what we all want rights to everybody. But the kind of peacemaking alternative, that you end up in these intractable situations when they are intractable, like in the Middle East, is this partition, right? We went through this in the US with like segregation, where before people can actually get to a state of coexistence, you have that modus vivendi and all these compromises. So I was just wondering about that. A lot of literary critics are now reading on being brought from Africa to America, including one of the people who visited, right, Kim Cold, as deeply sarcastic, and also this spoken in a way that it would go under the radar of the people, the white people around her. And seeing the freedom, the poem to George Washington up there, the thing that leapt out at me was that freedom all the way through, right? And she writes, everything she writes about is about fetters and freedom and the air and fire.
I would add another theme. I agree that freedom is very important to Terrell, to the National Association of Colored Women, but there's another project that's running concurrent with that makes Washington's inclusion here meaningful, and that is the project of citizenship.
Yes.
And that's what makes, I think, Phyllis Wheatley so prescient and so forward-looking. Yes, she talks about liberty and freedom all the time. One of Sarah's favorite poems.
Liberty and Peace.
Liberty and Peace, right.
Yeah, I love that poem.
But she's also anticipating, as do so many enslaved people, that moment post-emancipation when the new agenda is going to be obtaining the full rights of citizenship. And Mary Church Terrell was deeply immersed in that project, along with Du Bois. All of these African American leaders who disagreed on many fine points, agreed on one thing, that by the 1930s, as African Americans generally, we still were not able to assert the full rights of citizenship, particularly in the Deep South, where voting, access to voting, of course, was still problematic, equality in terms of labor. So Washington, talking about Washington, talking about the founding fathers, because Washington isn't the only one here, right? Adams is evoked as well, is a kind of coded way, but not so coded way, for African Americans to project our entitlements as citizens. It's a way of framing a discussion about citizenship. So what seems to us to be a rank admiration of a slaveholder is also functioning very differently in the context of 1930s African Americans. And there's a third project that's going on concurrent with Terrell's pageant, and that is the project that Carter Woodson, the founder of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, is engaged in, and that is teaching Black history.
Yes.
It is a project not just because there are segregated schools all over the United States, but because African American leaders see developing curriculums around Black history as a way of projecting a blueprint to the next generation. And by that I mean telling the next generation, advising the next generation of Black people, here is what lies before you. Here are the challenges you face. Here's the conversation that we think you're going to need to have. And again, they're trying to circle back and prepare young minds for participation in civic affairs, even as full participation has been denied us.
And I want to also point to a connection that I think Terrell's making that's so clearly articulating a way that I think she's identifying with Wheatley. And that is, there's this huge celebration going on of Washington. And she's like, I want to have a celebration of a Black African woman. And I'm going to co-opt Washington. So if you think about it, here's this 5-hour pageant that's all about the beauty and wonder of Blackness, and Washington becomes a bit player in the story instead of being the centerpiece of the story. And for me, that's the way Wheatley works over and over and over again. So yes, that line, "'Twas mercy," but you get to the end of the poem, and she says, "Remember, Christians," right? So she's a masterful writer at the way that, and I think so much of what she does is strategic management of her authorship. And Terrell does the same thing, right? That she does the same thing. I mean, Washington has a big scene, but it's one scene, right? And so here's the whole country celebrating the anniversary of Washington. But in this public school for Black kids, where Washington becomes a minor character in the story that really matters.
Which I think is a beautiful way to end this conversation. Thank you. Again, thank you so much for coming this evening. It meant so much to all of us. I thank everybody who has been part of this amazing process. And we hope to see you again sometime on another project.
Yay.
So thank you. So now we strike.